The story of Meghan Markle's pregnancies has become one of the most intensely debated and emotionally charged royal discussions of the modern era, not because of any single confirmed fact, but because of a growing web of unanswered questions, inconsistencies noticed by the public, and a level of secrecy that sharply contrasted with centuries of royal precedent. And when people try to understand why this subject refuses to fade, they often miss the most important point of all, which is that this was never just about one woman or two children, but about trust, transparency, and the way modern audiences collide with ancient institutions that were never designed to operate under 24-hour global scrutiny. Because from the moment Meghan entered the royal family, everything about her life was examined through two competing lenses. One sympathetic and protective, the other deeply skeptical. And those lenses only sharpened once pregnancy entered the picture. As royal history has always treated heirs not as private family matters, but as constitutional events governed by protocol, documentation, and ritual, rules that exist not to invade privacy, but to protect legitimacy, continuity, and public confidence. And it is within this context that online speculation began to take shape, slowly at first, then accelerating as viewers noticed moments that felt different from what they had been conditioned to expect by decades of previous royal births. Because unlike the carefully choreographed hospital steps, the visible medical confirmations, and the transparent timelines seen with other senior royals, Archie's arrival was announced in a manner that felt unusually vague, with shifting statements about timing, location, and details that were later clarified or adjusted, creating an impression, fair or not, that something about the process was being carefully controlled. And once that perception took root, every subsequent image, movement, and statement was scrutinized retroactively, with people revisiting footage, photographs, and interviews not to accuse, but to reconcile what they were seeing with what they believed they understood about pregnancy protocol and royal tradition. And when observers noticed moments where Meghan's pregnancy appearance seemed to change rapidly, or when clothing behaved in ways they found unfamiliar, those moments became fuel not because they proved anything, but because they added to a growing sense of uncertainty. And uncertainty is the most powerful driver of speculation, especially in an age where social media rewards questions more than answers. And as the conversation expanded, some began looking for explanations that could resolve all perceived inconsistencies at once, leading to discussions around surrogacy, a topic that in most contexts is neither controversial nor shameful, but which becomes complicated inside the royal framework due to long-standing succession rules that historically required an heir to be born of the body of the royal mother. Language rooted in eras long before modern reproductive medicine existed. And while many legal experts have pointed out that laws can evolve and interpretations can change, the absence of any formal clarification created a vacuum that theories rushed to fill, especially when Meghan and Harry later chose to step back from royal duties, increasing the perception that their relationship with the institution was strained and that trust between both sides had eroded. And it was during this period that references to past family tensions, interviews, and revelations about feeling unsupported were layered onto the pregnancy discussion, not because they were directly connected, but because they reinforced a narrative of secrecy versus disclosure. And for some viewers, that narrative felt incomplete without considering Meghan's life before royal marriage, leading to renewed attention on her early career, social circles, and the way ambition operates within elite spaces. Discussions that often blurred the line between fair curiosity and unfair judgment, especially when commentators began invoking statements allegedly made by family members, unnamed insiders, or online personalities who claimed to possess hidden knowledge, claims that circulated rapidly despite lacking verification. Because once a story reaches a certain emotional temperature, audiences often prioritize coherence over confirmation. And the idea that a single hidden explanation could resolve every question proved irresistible, particularly when contrasted against the royal family's historically rigid approach to disclosure, which often relies on silence as a stabilizing tool. not realizing that in the digital age, silence can amplify suspicion rather than suppress it. And as these theories spread, they were reinforced by selective comparisons to other royal pregnancies, with commentators noting how previous duchesses appeared publicly shortly after birth, engaged with medical staff, and followed established traditions. While Meghan's approach was framed as a deliberate departure that demanded interpretation, and whether that departure was motivated by a desire for privacy, personal autonomy, or something else entirely became the subject of endless debate. Because without official clarity, interpretation becomes projection, and projection reflects the values, fears, and expectations of the audience more than the reality of the individuals involved. And this is where the conversation takes on a deeper psychological dimension, because public figures often become screens onto which unresolved cultural anxieties are projected, including distrust of institutions, skepticism toward elites, and frustration with perceived double standards, all of which were already present in public discourse long before Meghan entered the picture, meaning that her story did not create these tensions but rather activated them. And when Harry spoke openly about media pressure, mental health, and the feeling of being trapped within an unforgiving system, some audiences interpreted that vulnerability as confirmation that something was deeply wrong behind the scenes, while others viewed it as deflection, illustrating how this same information can reinforce opposing conclusions depending on prior beliefs. And as time passed, the lack of definitive resolution allowed more extreme narratives to emerge online, including claims attributed to anonymous individuals alleging first-hand involvement, documentation, or hidden evidence. Claims that cannot be substantiated publicly and therefore must be treated as unverified allegations rather than established fact, but which nevertheless gained traction because they offered specificity in a landscape dominated by ambiguity. And specificity feels convincing even when unproven, particularly when it aligns neatly with existing suspicions. And yet, it is important to recognize that the very structure of these narratives mirrors classic rumor dynamics observed throughout history, where secrecy, power, and restricted access create conditions in which speculation thrives, especially when official channels remain closed. And while critics argue that the royal family's communication strategy inadvertently fueled these discussions by failing to address them directly, supporters counter that engaging with unfounded speculation only legitimizes it, leaving the institution trapped between transparency and precedent, a dilemma that has no easy solution. And at the center of this storm are two children who, regardless of how they entered the world, exist as real individuals deserving of privacy and protection from narratives they did not choose, a reality that complicates the ethics of continued speculation even as curiosity persists. And this tension between public interest and personal boundaries underscores why the story remains unresolved, because it is not merely about what happened, but about who gets to define truth in an era where authority is fragmented and trust is scarce. And as long as official silence continues and alternative explanations circulate unchecked, the conversation will likely persist, evolving with each new interview, documentary, or shift in public perception, not because a hidden truth is waiting to explode, but because uncertainty itself has become the story. A reminder that in the modern media landscape, absence of information can be as powerful as revelation. And that once doubt takes root in the collective imagination, it rarely disappears entirely, instead reshaping itself with each retelling, each reinterpretation, and each generation of viewers seeking coherence in a narrative that may never provide the closure they expect.